Welcome to our virtual summer book series, Joshilyn Jackson Reads. I'm Joy Pope with the Decatur Book Festival. Before we get started tonight, I'd like to thank Georgia Center for the Book for their generous partnership this year, with a special thanks to its Executive Director, Joe Davich, and Programming Assistant, Allie Wright, for all they've done to put together this program with the Book Festival. I would also like to thank the DeKalb Library Foundation and the DeKalb County Public Library for their longtime support of the festival and for all the wonderful things they do to help us share books with our community. And of course, I would like to thank Joshilyn Jackson for lending us her name and her time as she's helped us curate and program and also moderate these panels. Next week's event features Stacey Abrams with her new thriller, While Justice Sleeps, which is lovely. I've read it, it's wonderful. This is the only ticketed event in the series, so buy your tickets now at Heiress Books and More. There are some signed copies left, so get them while they're still on the shelf. Tonight's conversation is with Molly Greeley and Vanessa Riley. Vanessa Riley is a local Atlanta writer and of wonderful romance and other novels, not just romance novels. I love her work. And Molly Greeley is here with her retelling of Anne de Bourgh, the betrothed Darcy character in Pride and Prejudice. Tonight's conversation is moderated by our own Nicki Salcedo. Nicki is a Decatur resident, longtime Decatur Book Festival volunteer, and everybody's super friend. She's the author of a novel and 3 books of essays. The title piece for her latest collection, In My Father's Shoes, is based on the bittersweet experience she had wearing her father's shoes after he died. She's a graduate of Stanford University, where she studied English and creative writing. Her work has appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Good Housekeeping, Decatur-ish, Atlanta Loop. Nicki has 4 kids. She works in the corporate world by day and writes at night. She loves connecting with writers and readers, and she has a website, www.nickisalcedo.com. Tonight's sponsoring bookstore is Eagle Eye Bookstore, and they have the books for this event on hand, so go by and pick up a copy. There are some signed book plates too. If you'd like to help the Decatur Book Festival continue to bring literary programming to the community and to recover from quite an interruption by COVID, you can go to our website and donate. Finally, live transcription is available if you need it tonight. Search your Zoom toolbar to turn it on. Edited captions will also be available on the recording of this event when it's posted on YouTube later in a few days. So I'm going to let Nicki have it tonight and enjoy the conversation myself. There you go, Nicki.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you everyone who is here with us tonight. I am so excited to be a part of this summer reading series with Joshilyn Jackson, and another shout out to the Georgia Center for the Book and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution Decatur Book Festival presented by Emory University. We are here because of these organizations that support writers and readers, and our friends at the DeKalb Library Foundation with the DeKalb County Public Library. And you might be watching from across the country, so please even take care of your local library who make these events possible. And this one was in partnership with Georgia Center for the Book, as Joy mentioned. I want you to meet 2 great authors. I feel very privileged. We're having a summer reading series, but that means I got to spend my winter reading some good books. And I'd love to introduce you to Molly Greeley. Molly is from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and is a graduate of Michigan State University, where she studied English and creative writing. She currently lives in northern Michigan with her husband and 3 kids. And tonight she's going to talk to us about the Heiress. And joining Molly is Vanessa Riley. Vanessa writes Regency romance and historical fiction with dazzling multicultural communities and powerful persons of color. And Vanessa juggles a teenager, a military husband who she likes to cook for. She empowers women with conversations about STEM. She has an engineering brain, so a creative and an engineering brain that's joining us today. And Vanessa is going to be talking to us about an Earl, the girl, and a toddler. So I'm going to welcome both Molly and Vanessa tonight. And we're going to have a conversation, just the three of us, like we're at a coffee shop. Please feel free to use the chat. We are going to put some links in there throughout the evening to remind you about ways to support these events, how to find the books, and your questions. So we will keep an eye on the chat. But why don't we start with you, Molly? Tell us a little bit about what drew you specifically to historical fiction.
I think for me, historical fiction when I was a kid was a way to connect with history. In school, my history classes tended to be very dry. I just, in college, I lucked out with some wonderful history professors and had some very engaging classes. But in my, other schooling, it tended to be kind of memorization of dates and these incredible world events that, affected people. Didn't really have a human element to them as far as I could tell. And so it was when I started reading historical fiction that I got really engaged with history and started to really care about these things that had happened. I think because I was getting into the hearts and minds of the people who, experienced them. And so, so it's always been kind of an interest of mine. And then I also feel like there's an element in historical fiction of sometimes it mirrors today's society and can kind of show us how things maybe haven't changed quite as much as we would like to think they have. Like in my book, The Heiress, there are LGBTQ characters, and obviously the persecution of LGBTQ people continues today in a different way than it was in Regency times, but it still happens. And my main character is addicted to laudanum, and there is a huge parallel with today's opioid crisis. When I was reading about that, it just really struck me like kind of like a slap across the face, like how things things just haven't changed very much. And it's just kind of incredible to see your own society mirrored, several hundred years ago.
That's fascinating. What I take away from that means we are history. And Vanessa, when I ask you a similar question about what draws you to historical fiction, what's your response?
It was one of the subjects that I just completely loved. Just like Molly's saying, in school, there are mathematics and sciences and whatnot, but this vein of answering why did the world work like this? What lessons did the people on the ground, take to heart? And what did they not? What are we still struggling with today that we keep failing these lessons? And so I firmly believe history repeats itself. The faces change, the locations change, but human nature is pretty much the same. And if we don't learn lessons, then we always are subject to repeat itself. So to me, historical fiction just embodies that, because it goes in and it takes the facts on the ground and adds this human element, like Molly's saying, but it just takes you on another perspective, and it just opens you up to all of these things that you really wish was in your history books, but it was ignored, or there's a saying that the history is told by the victors. So you get a lot of historical fiction that is written from one point of view, and it totally ignores for many, many, many years the views of underrepresented people, the views of marginalized people. And so I love being able to add my voice to show that even if there was suffering, or even if there were bad times, people of marginalized descent, people that look like me, we still had happy ever afters. We still found ways to take the power we had and even sometimes grab more to do different and exciting things.
That's great. Vanessa, why don't you tell us in your words the premise of your novel that we're here to talk about tonight?
Okay, so an Earl, the Girl, and a Toddler. And I once again, thanks Kensington for allowing me to have corny titles. Because if you ever see a Vanessa Riley book and the title is slightly corny, I'm just but if you follow, this is the second book in the Rogues and Remarkable Women series. The first is, of course, A Duke, the Lady, and a Baby. And you met two characters that are the follow-ons in this book. And one of the things is, when you read a series, I tend to have the characters of all the all that you meet along the way continue on. So you see more of their journey as you go through the book. Each of one of my books are standalones, but you get more jokes. You get more, if you're invested in certain people, you get to see how they are progressing in their walks. But you meet Jamina St. Mar. Jamina is an amnesiac. You learn at the beginning of this book that she's an amnesiac because she was sailing on the Minerva from Jamaica. This is a true ship that literally goes down because of a hurricane, and survivors were plucked out by another British frigate that was heading to London. So you have all these, because you don't have CNN to be able to show you, and this is the wreckage, and this is what's going on. You literally have to wait for days and weeks on end to find out, did my loved ones make it? And so you start the book literally with people waiting in line, and they're wanting to know what's happening. And one of the people that's waiting in line is P. Daniel Thackeray. Daniel is the barrister that we met in book 1. He is the nephew of Lady Shrewsbury. Lady Shrewsbury is the leader of the Widow's Grace, which is a secret society that is destined for women to help women. They are righting the wrongs that the Court of Chancery, the English laws that are against women's rights, that women oftentimes were relegated to bedlam when they wanted to control their assets, when they wanted to keep them quiet. And the Widow's Grace is out finding evidence so that they can use the same systems to free these women, to return their children, or to get them their means. And so Daniel's in line, he's a good guy, and he's online, and he's waiting to find out if his fiance is on the Minerva had made it. And he's thrust this baby in his arm because he's the only Black man in line, and the baby's Black. And so they assume that this is the person he has to be waiting for. And during that time frame, Black children that had no parents, or they couldn't easily figure out who the parents were, they would be sold to a brothel as an exotic. And they would literally be raised to be in that lifestyle. And so Daniel knows this because he works in the courts all the time. He sees these various cases, the ones that actually make it to court. And so in that judgment, he decides that this must be Phoebe's baby, because Phoebe's the only Black woman he knows or suspects was on the Minerva. And so he's going to raise this child for Phoebe. He's going to have to forgive her for not telling him about bringing a baby, but that's just something he's going to deal with. But that's how we begin the book. So you're going to see this journey of one man trying to protect everyone, but also shield them from the truth, because he knows it could potentially hurt his daughter, Hope, which he loves, because he doesn't know the status of this child. A child coming from Jamaica during that time frame could be enslaved. If the baby is enslaved, the baby is literally property of the people back in Jamaica, the Duns. That is a situation on your hands right there. And at the same time, Jamina is trying to figure out, she knows she's on the Minerva. Who was she? Who are people back there? What's going on? And so you've got these forces that are sometimes working with each other, sometimes working against each other, all trying to find truth and at point of happiness or safety so they can build their own.
Great. So you start us with some historical events and you give us a fictionalized story. What Molly does is bring us into a story we believe we know. And for many of us, a story we know in our heart back and forth, have read a book 1,000 times. And Molly, tell us how we have come to maybe rediscover somebody we thought we knew.
So my book is about Anne de Bourgh from Pride and Prejudice, and readers of Pride and Prejudice probably only remember her as the woman that Mr. Darcy was, assumed to be engaged to, assumed by everyone except him, I think. And then, and who she's such a minor character, she doesn't have any speaking lines. So she's the daughter of this very formidable kind of nasty woman, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. And she's, all we know about her is that she's very rich, she's going to inherit this estate, and that she is very sickly. Like, she's too sickly to even learn to play the piano. She's too sickly to go to London, like a lot of young ladies did back then, to try to, have a social season. So what I was curious about, like always, was what was wrong with her. Why was she sickly? Because that's never disclosed in Pride and Prejudice. And when I was researching my previous book, which is also a Pride and Prejudice continuation, I came across this stray fact about how often laudanum, which is a tincture of opium, was given to pretty much everybody in Regency times, from anything from like menstrual cramps to serious, injuries. And it was given to children with kind of scary regularity, especially if they, were teething, or if their parents wanted them to be quiet, like, mill workers would give it to their children to keep them asleep while they had to be at work. And in wealthy households also, sometimes nurses and parents gave these tinctures to these babies just because, it was easier. And nobody seemed to think that there was much harm in this, although there were some newspaper reports of, death, and they didn't have the word addiction then, but they talked about how, people felt that they needed these drugs. But in general, it was just this unregulated, pretty bad situation. And so I came across that fact and then started down this research rabbit hole and discovered this, several firsthand accounts of laudanum addiction, but also there's one in particular I think it was called Confessions of a Young Lady Laudanum Drinker. And she was this woman who was writing this angry letter to the newspaper, but basically it was to her doctor who had prescribed laudanum to her. And she described herself as someone, when she was on laudanum, who couldn't be bothered to sew, couldn't do anything. She would just lie there. Everyone thought she was really sick. Like, it was just this, and everything she described sounded exactly like Anne de Bourgh to me. And so it was just this like thing that clicked in my head, like maybe that's what was wrong with her. I can completely see Lady Catherine drugging her child if she's not wanting to have, wanting to have a difficult child. So that was the beginning of the story. And then from there, Anne eventually does ditch her drug. And then she goes on to try to basically figure out who she wants to be at, the age of almost 30. She has kind of a late coming of age and tries to figure out who she wants to be, goes to London, finds love, tries to figure out if she wants to take control of her estate like she's supposed to. And, there's, that she gets to actually experience a London season, which is a little overwhelming for her because she's never really left her home before. And it's just, a lot of it is just her internal life and trying to figure out, who she is really, because she never had the chance to figure that out.
Well, I often tell people who are new to reading romance that romance novels are never about falling in love. They're always about something else. So we've heard from Vanessa, a tragic accident, amnesia, death and grief. Molly, you've talked about maybe a villainous mother being oppressed by society, kind of rediscovering ourselves, dealing with a substance use disorder in a society where, maybe people cared or did not care about what happened with a woman. But yet these characters are destined to find love. So maybe Molly, tell me your perspective on love and romance.
Oh, I love stories. I always love stories. For me, for this book in particular, I really wanted to write something a little more joyful than the last book that I wrote. And Anne de Bourgh seemed kind of poised to, because she, was in a very unusual, situation for women back then. She actually owned her own estate. She didn't just have some money. She could choose to marry or not marry, or she could marry. She could marry anyone she wanted, really. She wasn't dependent on finding a rich husband, or any husband at all. And so I felt like there were so many possibilities open to her that weren't open to other women at the time, at least not as easily. And so I really I really just wanted to give her, I wanted to give her a love story just because there is something joyful about them. And there's also just something about finding two people and trying to make a connection between them that I always find fascinating in stories.
Well, it's fascinating for us as readers, especially when it's unexpected. Vanessa, what about love when the world has gone wrong, whenever you've lost everything? What is love like in that story?
Love is a miracle in those stories. And you have literally two people in an Earl, the girl, and a toddler where everything has gone wrong.
Mhm.
Daniel fell in love with Phoebe, the woman he married by proxy, through letters, 18 months of letters. And to me, that's a special type of individual who's able to be that vulnerable and accepting, and they find each other through letters, and then they're tragically separated because of the Minerva going down in the hurricane. And then with Jamina, she's a complete blank slate. She remembers nothing of her past, nothing of the husband who left her a dower, nothing. She only knows the last 2 years, and that's been in Bedlam. And she doesn't come into herself until she meets Patience, who becomes her best friend, who is also tossed into Bedlam, not similar circumstances, but a defrauding circumstance. She was wrongfully put into Bedlam, and these two women bond, and their friendship is almost another romance in these books, because these women are both broken in a way because of the way society has treated them. They're different. They feel like they're outsiders because one is coming from the colony of Demerara, which is Guyana, present-day Guyana. The other is coming from Jamaica into English society. They know of English society, they know the rules, they know the different things, but it's still very different when you are not from England and you now have to adhere to those rules and trying to make your way within society. And then once again, there are various stratas of society, because they, for all intents and purposes, you've got Jamina suffering somewhat of a mental health issue. She has amnesia. The world knows she has amnesia. So there are scenes in there where people are just bluntly, trying to be nice, but then they'll say these offhand things. Well, you remember when? Oh no, you don't. I'm so sorry, other kind of thing. So that you get these different ways of their interfacing with the way the world is now for them. But love, once again, is a miracle. It's a miracle that the two women found each other in Bedlam, were able to be their supports, and that's one of the ways they end up getting out of Bedlam. It's a miracle that Daniel is now willing to trust his heart again after, basically never being able to fulfill this relationship because she's coming by proxy as first wife. And then the fact that Jamina is used to everything being taken away. She lost everything on the Minerva. And now how can she trust that this love that she thinks that she's finding with Daniel is going to last? So there's this, it's a miracle that they all have enough faith to step out there and to love each other and to continue moving forward.
Well, it's a leap of faith to write about love. It's not that easy to write about. But each of you have also written about people we don't traditionally see. And we've mentioned Pride and Prejudice, we've mentioned Regency period in England. For those familiar with these books and stories, there's some we will hold dear forever, love these books, love these stories, love these characters. But maybe something was missing, and maybe it was people of color, maybe it was people with a different orientation who found love in a non-traditional by those society rules. And Molly, you said, are these stories and complications any different from today? That's certainly a great point to bring up. But each of you had to choose to bring these characters to life in this way. You could have written characters close to what we have seen previously, but you did have to choose to tell this story. So maybe Vanessa, starting with you, you've brought these people from other countries, from other cultures into England. Why do you feel like that's an important story to tell?
I think it's a very important story to tell because what we have seen is not quite accurate. Britain was a melting pot. The coastal cities of Portsmouth and London um, have all this transactions of people coming from all across the globe to come to England. It's one of the commerce centers. We've got all these wars going on where you have soldiers going to France and all of the various colonies. You've got years and years of war. Well, they bring back people back with them. People are going back and forth. And so for the most part, when we look at Regency romances, you only see the ton, which is this elect set of people. You see their lives. You very rarely see the middle class that supports, unless it's in function of service towards these upper crust people. And then once again, you never see or hardly ever see the actual people of color. Pride and Prejudice is one of my all-time favorite books. I watched the movie, the 1995 version, because that's the only one that counts.
Of course.
Of course, there's no argument there.
Okay. I love it. And there's this scene where Darcy, he's looking for Wickham and Lydia, and he's sweating, and the little kids are running out with the tankard of ale, and so he's refreshing himself, and he's in the worst part of London, and there's not a single person of color on that street.
No.
Even if you don't know that people of color served in the households, even if you don't know that there was a middle class that had drugstores and commerce, and if you don't know about the musicians and the elite people that the Prince Regent selected and put in his circle, so that you have these Black faces that are interfacing with the hierarchy, even if you don't know any of that, on this one podunk street, you should have seen one person of color to represent at least the 20,000 free Blacks that are living in London during that time frame. And so one of the things I want to do is, because this piece of history is so fascinating to me. And I get it from all sides. My father's from Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago is one of the colonies of Great Britain. Great Britain colonized a huge swath of the West Indies. They were always fighting with Spain and France and Portugal and Sweden at one point for a few of these different places. So there's all of this intermingling, and you never see that in these romances because they all have an effect, just like the wars have an effect on the people who live through them. So does the colonization aspects. And so I like to bring those to the forefront.
Well, thank you for doing that. And Molly, for you, it's the same, the same street that we're walking down. Who finds love? And you had to choose Eliza to enter this story. So what was that choice for you?
For me, I think it was, again, the fact that, just like Vanessa said, there were so many people who are never represented in these books, or very rarely represented in these books. And so, gay people, non-binary people, trans people existed in London, during Regency times. And, it's in the newspapers. The persecution of gay men was just right there in the newspapers. They were described as unnatural acts back then, but sometimes men were killed for them. But women were lucky, relatively speaking, because if they happened to be gay, they generally were not persecuted in the same way that men were. There was even this one court case that I found where a school teacher was, or two school teachers, I believe, were found from a girls' school guilty of unnatural acts together, and then the judge just threw out the case because he was like, what could two women possibly do together? Like, they just didn't have, I know that some people had the concept of it, but in the broader society, it wasn't an accepted concept that two women could find love, much less any kind of physical pleasure together. And so I felt like Anne Bourgh, again, with her position, because so many of Jane Austen's books are about women who don't have money, who need to marry money. And Anne doesn't need to do that. It was like, if anyone could find like happily ever after relatively easily with another woman, it would be her, because she doesn't need anything from anybody. So I, was trying to think about who she might fall in love with. And it just seemed like someone like her who had never been out in society might really, really strike up a great friendship with someone who is very gregarious, who was, also just a little bit unusual, because Anne's a pretty unusual person too. And it just kind of went from there, that I just felt like we needed to show that people have always existed. I mean, they just aren't talked about. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for bringing it to the forefront. We've seen a resurgence in this past, not just this year, but the past few years with Downton Abbey. There was above stairs and below stairs, so we could actually see maybe that people who worked supporting the family in a service capacity might have love and complicated lives. And with the Bridgerton series on Netflix, that the world might have represented men who loved each other, people of different color. And, there's always a reaction from the public. Any positive things that people have told you? Maybe Molly, starting with you, what positive feedback have you heard about your story?
I've gotten some notes from people, from some readers who felt that they were seeing themselves represented in a genre that they don't usually see themselves represented in. I've had several women wrote me lovely notes, and it just made my entire day. Just because it's one of the best things I think you can hear as a writer, that you've, let someone see themselves in the world when they're not usually seen there. And so, but I mean, it's interesting, because I've also gotten notes from people who think that it's pretty much, a gross modernization of the Pride and Prejudice world to add anything that wasn't strictly in Jane Austen. And I just, I don't say this, but usually to people when they write me this, but it's kind of like, it's not a modernization. Gay men, gay women existed in that society. Again, it just wasn't, their stories were not the ones being told.
Mm-hmm. Well, I find it fascinating because as a person of color, I read books about people who did not look like me, and I could always find a connection. And you can name, all the way through Western literature and reading other literature from across the world. There are common experiences we have. And Vanessa, I'll pose that same question to you, which is, what feedback do people give you when they're seeing a character in a world we've imagined, but always thought we'd be looking on the outside? What have you heard?
For this particular book, because I in the past, I've gotten letters like Molly, where people who base their history on what they saw on TV didn't understand the depth and the diversity of the history. So I've gotten some letters like that. But as of recent, things like Bridgerton have opened people's eyes to possibilities to expand, certain things. And just the new scholarship, because now people are more aware. I'm not the only voice in the world saying, no, it was diverse. But in this particular book, I'm getting feedback because I'm showing you Daniel and Daniel's friends. Daniel is a very special character to me. Daniel is a Blackamoor Earl. I've done maybe two heroes of color that are titled. Normally, I would do them. They are middle class, they're barristers, those kind of things. But this is my second one out of 20 something odd titles that the hero is a man of color. And he's not just a spot of color. So he's not just one character. You literally see his world. So you see his friends that are supporting him, doing life with him. So you see his contemporary George Bridgetower, who a real person who the Prince Regent actually was so impressed with his music, literally gives him funding for education, gets him out of a dangerous situation with his father, and even gives a stipend to his mother because he believed in this young man of color, his ability to play wonderful music, and he wants to make that way. You see the boxer, Bill Richmond, true boxer. He's hinted at in the Bridgerton series on Netflix. But he's a contemporary, another one of Prinny's prodigies that has been spotlighted for his talents and whatnot. But these are Daniel's friends. So Daniel's somewhat the Socratic mind that Prinny was invested in. And you see these men, but you see these men doing life together. You see them, their concerns, their politics, but they are not downtrodden, so to speak. They are not, they have concerns about safety, but they're not oppressed in that sense. They're not fearful. They are owning their positions of power, and they're varied in the strata of levels of power that they have. But they own that, and they take that with them. And you see their joy, because Black men joy in historical romances, particularly Regency romances, is few and far between. And so I wanted to give you guys a different experience to see these people, see a little bit what I see every day, because it's my older brother. His humor is my brother Gerald all day long. His smile is my husband Frank. The way he cares for his stepdaughter is my brother Mark all the way along. And there's just the unusual situations. That's my brother Chris. Usual situations he can get into. Although Chris has never lost his pantaloons.
Yet.
Yes.
It could happen.
But I wanted you guys, I wanted in this particular book, particularly since I was editing this after Ahmaud Arbery, after George Floyd, I wanted you to see Black men joyfully doing life in this Regency world.
Well, we're talking about fiction, but both of you are clearly spending a lot of time with research. And I love historical fiction. It's my favorite. I either read science fiction or historical fiction. I kind of leave the gap of contemporary. So this is like my sweet spot of enjoying history, but both of you have spent a lot of time doing research. Molly, I'd love to know how the research shaped the story, maybe in an unexpected way. You're studying, you're reading for a prior book, you're getting information, but how does the research shape the story?
That's a great question. Goodness. So, I mean, yeah, this was not a story I expected to write. Like I said, this was just kind of one that fell into my lap. And I mean, this entire book came from the research. Like if I hadn't stumbled upon that like stray fact, I probably never would have written this book, and it wouldn't have even occurred to me. So, so that was pretty unexpected. And then it was, I mean, even just as far as researching what lesbian life was like then for women who tried to live together, it was just fascinating because there were women who lived as they called themselves wives and husband wives, and some of them got made it into the newspaper as oddities, but otherwise were kind of ignored. And so, I was trying to figure out how Anne and her lover could basically form a life together. And there were a lot of women I discovered who basically just lived together. They just did it. And I guess they weren't unusual enough in their behavior to make it into the papers the way some other women did. But I just kind of loved the idea of kind of brazenly just living your life as you wish to, in a time when that was just absolutely not acceptable behavior. But they managed to do it in a way where they kind of skated under the radar somewhat too. So as that was part of the book, I really wasn't sure how it was going to end for Anne and Eliza. I couldn't quite figure out realistically how I could give them the happily ever after. And finding out that there were these women out there who really they just lived. I mean, we don't hear about them very often, but they just lived just like any other couple. And they might not have been married, legally, but they were, and to them, in their minds and hearts. And so that was a lovely thing to discover, that there was more joy, I guess, than, like Vanessa was saying, it was not all sadness and gloom necessarily just because they were marginalized people. So
I think that's an important story for us to hear. The media wants us to believe that sort of the victim, the tortured, the oppressed story. But history is filled with joy. So I'm glad that the research, Molly, that you did brought you to the conclusion that people found a way. And I love what you just said. What if we just lived the way we were supposed to? What if I did? What if you, like, that's a challenge for anybody reading your book, to think about how might we live the way we're supposed to. And Vanessa, for you, that research, is it the beginning of your process, or do you come up with a story first? Where does research fit in with your novel?
Research is beginning, middle, and end. Because I'm constantly doing research, and tell you right now, if you ever find anything that is of interest, you write it down, you put it, stack it away, and you will never find it again. There's several dozen books I could have written if I had just put that fact down so that I could, because you can't find it again. Most of my greatest discoveries are when I'm looking for something else, and you'll find different nuggets. And what Molly was saying, I think last year it came out, they found a diary for a farmer in the upper part of England. And there was a famous sodomy trial going on. And he's sitting around and he's saying he doesn't think that there should be a problem. He was definitely against capital punishment for this. But he was like, he could see what was so heinous about these relationships. And it's a whole new spin because, the Victorian ideals come in and they frame certain things in very, very purist kind of ways. And that has been the adopted of what happened in the Regency. Regency is very is a lot more fair-minded, a lot more equitable, a lot more social mobilization than you get in the Victorian era. So it's like, whatever we think is probably wrong. And so we just need to keep going and keep finding and keep uncovering things and keep telling all of these various stories from the different perspectives, because that's how we do true justice for the time periods.
That's great. Probably the research reaffirms for us our experience that we're not alone. We always think we're the only one who this is the first time, but history reaffirms this has happened 1,000 times before, 1,000 years ago. I take great joy in that, of thinking of people who had profound love, who were my great grandparents times 1,000. So I'm glad that the research does that for you. I am going to remind our listeners that we would love to take questions from you. We're nearing the close of our program, so would love to take some questions from the audience if you want to use our chat function. I do have a few more questions for our authors because I am really excited about these books and what you're doing. I love romance, and I think there is room in romance for every different type of story, happy, adventurous, in the future, in the past, silly, serious, everything. So I certainly appreciate what you all are doing. I'd love to know what's up next for you while I go to the Q&A. Vanessa, what's up after? I know we're going to talk soon about another book you have right on the shelf behind you.
Yes. So in July comes out my first historical fiction. Because typically up to this point, they've been pretty much historical romances, historical mystery issues kind of things. But this will be my first historical fiction. And it's based on the true life history of Dorothy Kirwan Thomas. Dorothy Kirwan Thomas was an enslaved woman who literally buys her freedom and the freedom of her family and goes on to be one of the most powerful women landowners in the West Indies. She's an incredible life of her and her children, of her questionable love choices. She's a mistress of a future king. So Meghan Markle was not the first, boys and girls. Dorothy was.
Excellent.
So excited about that.
So the Island Queen, we will see that also this summer.
You will see that this summer. And then, of course, next year you will see Sister Mother Warrior, which is my second historical fiction. That is the two women, or 2.5 women who shaped the Haitian Revolution. We often focus on Dessalines or Toussaint, but there were a number of women who had key strategic roles in shaping the mindset of the leaders, or actually literally engaging in the battles. And so you're going to meet those two women. And then
does that mean you're moving more towards historical fiction and leaving romance, or a little of both for you in the future?
Oh no, we're going to stay on everything's full bore, because you're going to get the third book, tentatively titled A Marquess, an Artist, and a Baby Maybe, in the Rogues and Remarkable Women series. So
let's hope your publisher lets you keep those titles, because we're enjoying them. And Molly, what about you? I know this is related to your prior book, but what's coming up for you?
So I just finished recently a draft of my third book, which is a historical take on Beauty and the Beast, but which was actually inspired by a stray fact I found while researching the Heiress. So this seems to be kind of a theme. But right now that's with my agent. So we'll see where that goes. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Excellent. That's very exciting. So that means while you research the Beauty and the Beast story, you're going to get the nugget for so on and so on.
Yes.
Good. That's going to keep us excited. I am going to look at some of the questions here. And there was one question about Anne's trouble with addiction, and did the current opioid crisis really influence your telling of that part of the story?
I did definitely research, I did research into the current crisis. There is a lot of historical documentation from back then. There were a lot of firsthand accounts of people, including a lot of writers who were addicted to laudanum. And so they're who detailed their own experiences in entire books. And so there was a lot to draw on from both history and present day. But I also got in touch with a professor who does research into opium addiction, and basically just ran my scenes by her to make sure that they seemed accurate, and was very grateful to have her help with that. Because you can read all the accounts, but some of the writers' accounts, even like Wilkie Collins was a very famous addict, and he has all of these details about, in some of his writings, about hallucinations he had. And so I have a lot of that in Anne's story, but I really wanted to make sure that wasn't some kind of exaggeration on his part, basically. But apparently that is true. So it was pretty fascinating.
Well, that's great for you to include it. It is Mental Health Awareness Month. And when we talk about history being real, those subjects of dealing with substance use disorder does go back into every culture has a different substance or an experience there. So it might even give readers a new perspective or level of compassion as we think about current experiences. So I do appreciate you doing that. And let's see what other questions we have here. Was there any part of either of your stories that was particularly fun for you to write? Maybe Molly, tell us a favorite part of the story for you.
I think the ending was probably my favorite part to write. And I'd originally had a different ending, and then went back to it just the next day, and I knew it wasn't right and erased it. sat down to write a new one, and it was just one of those magical moments where it kind of flows, which don't happen to me very often. So it was just really lovely. And I didn't even know when I sat down exactly where it was going to go. It was just one of those things where it just kind of came. So that was genuinely fun to write, the epilogue.
Oh, good. And how about you, Vanessa?
There's two for me. One, there's a scene where the fellows are sitting around and they're playing cards. So they're playing 21, and they're talking as men do, politics, women, et cetera, et cetera. And little Hope, the little toddler, toddles into the room, and these hardened men kind of stop, and they have this 3 men and a baby moment where they literally end up singing to this child, and I just thought it was just adorable. The child is adorable, and it was just fun to do, because normally hardened men, and all of a sudden this little angel toddles in and she just takes over the entire thing. That's a great deal of fun. And then of course I love women scaling buildings. So you have Jamina and Patience scaling into the Lincoln's Inn. And and then one of them's good at it and one's not, and so you get all those dynamics that happens when that happens. So that was a lot of fun.
That's great. I like to hear about the fun part of writing. There is a question here, which is it lonely being a writer? There's sort of some perceptions, but maybe Molly, what's your writing community like?
So truthfully, since getting my first book published, I've found a much broader community, which is lovely. In college, I took writing classes and really, really loved to, be able to bounce things off of all of the people in those classes. And now, where I am now, I don't really have a writing group, and I really missed that. But I've discovered this whole world of writers, all over the world who are just, everyone is so supportive of everybody else, and it's genuinely like it's really a community, and it's just lovely, and we all kind of cheer each other on and look at each other's work. So no, I mean, for me personally, it's not lonely. Pre-pandemic, I used to love to write in coffee shops and at the library, and there's even a community in those places of people who similarly went just to either write or do their work, and you just kind of connect on a daily basis with the same people. So it was lovely.
That's great. And Vanessa, I know you participate with a variety of different writing organizations. What's your writing community like?
It's pretty wide, and so and you just, the camaraderie, the sisterhood, I think is fun. And everybody has the ones that you will dial on the phone or Zoom and say, hey, let's go, I'm struggling with this plot line. What do you think? What would be the natural reaction if I did X, Y, or Z? So it's always great to have those people in your circles. But a lot of times you have to be by yourself, because you've got to get those words on the page, and you can't be distracted. So it's what some might think is lonely is work. It's really you're putting the work into it. But I'm very thankful for the writing community to have folks that you can just Zoom and talk about stuff, or Zoom and do writing marathons, or just pick up the phone to ask questions. So no, I don't find the walk lonely at all.
That's good. I think that's good for aspiring writers to hear that. Yes, you will have your research time, your quiet time, your writing time, and you will have your let's get together, pull each other up, camaraderie, support. I don't think it's possible to write without someone telling you, Molly, your writing is great. Vanessa, your stories change me. Like that kind of feedback from our writing friends is what keeps us writing, and then can get it to the readers.
Yes.
I think that's incredibly important. There was one question I did want to touch on about original resources in your research. So did you have either of you first person accounts that you were reading when you were doing research?
You go ahead, please.
No, there's tangential, so you get diaries of other characters, but for you get more documents. So like when I do research, it's more document oriented to figure out where people are.
Mhm.
So I look for wills, I look for marriage license, I look for baptismal certificates, because those plant people and in any leases, marriage contracts, those put people in specific places at specific points in time. And just the language that's used, how it's structured, who did it, etc., tells you all different types of things about the economic conditions that these people find themselves in. So I do a lot of investigative work because when you're I'm focusing on marginalized folks. Oftentimes, especially if they're laborers, they're not going to have the time to sit around and write diaries and whatnot. If you find one, you are blessed to have one. Put it totally blessed to have one. But a lot of time you're putting pieces here and there together in order to come up with the entire story.
And Molly, you mentioned you had found some
Yeah,
pieces.
I did. Yeah, I was very lucky in this particular case because there was that one just that wasn't a newspaper article, but it was like a letter to her doctor that was published from that anonymous young lady who was very angry about her own experience with laudanum. And it was literally, it was her experience from first taking it through withdrawal. And it was just like gold. And so, and then there was also a book called Confessions of an English Opium Eater. And that one, it's an entire book of this man's experience with his, with his struggle with laudanum and other forms of opium. And so those both were firsthand accounts that were invaluable. But otherwise, it was a lot of secondhand accounts, newspaper clippings, that kind of thing that were, like Vanessa said, you just piece things together.
Okay, that's great. So for those aspiring writers listening, the research is out there. You have to be a little bit of a detective. I'd love just one last word sentence from each of you. If you could encourage any of the readers who might be thinking about writing, any words of encouragement as we close out? How about you, Molly?
I would say if you have tough days when you're writing, if it feels like words aren't coming, just keep going anyway. Because those days, I used to let those days stop me, and I would think that maybe this wasn't the story for me. I'm just that, this isn't the right story. And what I finally figured out is that you can, if you're passionate about a story, it is your story. You just need to get through those days because they will happen. But there will also be days of just like complete joy writing as well. But writing is work. I mean, it's wonderful, but it's also work, just like Vanessa was saying. So, yeah.
That's great. That's great advice. How about you, Vanessa?
I'm actually going to piggyback on what Molly's saying is telling your authentic story. Sometimes you get advice of writing towards the market and this is what's hot and I should write that. And I'm here to tell you, write what is in your heart, write the stories that make you excited, because people will get it and they will get that excitement and it'll grow. And, because when I started, there were many challenges because the scholarship wasn't there. People didn't believe history, or they weren't taught history. And I kept going. And sooner or later, if you are consistent in delivering a product, people will get excited. They will, and things catch up. So now more outlets are telling the stories of the diversity of this particular time frame. And so everything meets at a happy point. But if you stop because you let discouragement take over, you're going to miss out on telling these stories and getting these stories out to the world. So just like Molly said, stick to your guns. Tell the stories that you know that in your heart, in your gut, are the ones you need to tell.
That's great. So we're going to keep writing. We're going to be authentic. I'm going to tell everyone to read these two books. I loved talking with you. I love these stories. I like seeing the world in a new way. Our bookstore partner is Eagle Eye. If you are interested, we have some links posted. You can have signed book plates so we can share these books with you. Next week, just the reminder that we will be speaking with Stacey Abrams. Joshilyn will be back. It is a ticketed event. We do have some more seats available, and you will be able to get a signed copy. And we're going to be reading all summer. So I cannot thank Molly and Vanessa enough for putting their stories into the world. Thank you. Thank you. And another thank you to the Georgia Center for the Book in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution Decatur Book Festival presented by Emory University. We would not be here without the DeKalb Library Foundation and the DeKalb County Public Library for their longtime support. These are people who love books, authors, readers. These people love us. So any way we can show our support and our partnership with the Georgia Center for the Book, please support your local library and your local booksellers. Our libraries are keeping us alive right now. And spread your love for these two authors. Tell your friends that you read these books. Have your book clubs read these books. Let's show our love to these authors. And thank you for putting these stories out into the world. So wonderful to speak with you both tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful night, everyone. We'll see you next week.
All right, thank you.
Bye.